Hello. Today we're going to listen to the last of the lectures, and we're going to go to the Caribbean. And the Caribbean is this big sea down here, and around the Caribbean are what we call the Antilles, all of this region. So these are also called the West Indies. So these terms are used a lot interchangeably. All right, now the name Antilles is an old name, actually predating the discovery of the New World. There are two names for places in the Americas that predate Columbus: Brazil and the Antilles. So this fellow, I'm not even going to try and pronounce his name, narrated Columbus's discovery of Cuba and Hispaniola here. There's Europe. And this is, obviously they didn't know much about North America or South America, really. They had some interesting ideas. But he said, now I think this is being translated from Spanish, but turning therefore the sterns of his ship towards the east, he assumed that he had found Ophir, whither Solomon's ship sailed for gold. But the descriptions of the cosmographers well considered, it seemeth but both these and the other islands adjoining are the islands of Antilles. All right, so here we have the Caribbean region as we understand it today. And we talked a little bit about the Caribbean tectonic plate, which occupies pretty much this area. And there are three island chains that are of interest that define the eastern, the northern, and the southern margins of the Caribbean plate. So these are the Greater Antilles. These are the Lesser Antilles. And these are the Leeward Antilles. Okay, and we'll talk a little bit about each of them. All right, let's talk just real quickly where the name Caribbean came from. It came from an Indian tribe known as the Caribs. So they were the Kalinago, or also known as the Island Caribs, or simply just Caribs. They were the original inhabitants of this region. And then they were associated with the Taino, or the Arawaks, who were also indigenous people of the Caribbean and Florida. And they were the principal inhabitants of many of these places. All right. So let's watch a 5-minute video about the Caribbean. I hope you enjoy it.
The Caribbean is best known for its beautiful tropical beaches and palm trees, but it also has a very interesting geological history that started about 130 million years ago. The Caribbean plate is the 16th largest plate and about the size of the country of India. An interesting feature is that the Caribbean plate is submerged beneath the sea except around its margins, where most tectonic activity occurs and most people live. An amazing number of political entities are found on the edges of the Caribbean plate: 13 independent countries and 17 dependencies of the US, the Netherlands, France, and the UK. The Caribbean plate is bounded north and south by strike-slip faults and subduction zones at the east and west. In the south and north, it's bounded by the South American plate and the North American plate, respectively. Because the Caribbean plate is moving east relative to North and South America, the strike-slip faults are mostly sinistral in the north and mostly dextral in the south. To the west, the Cocos Plate subducts eastward beneath Central America. In the east, the Atlantic Oceanic Plate subducts westward beneath the Lesser Antilles. The Caribbean Plate strike-slip faults are geologically diverse. Some segments show compression or extension as well as strike-slip behavior. This is called transpression or transtension. In the transtensional segments, it's common to find pull-apart basins. One of them is the Cayman Trough, where we find the shortest oceanic spreading ridge in the world, one that has been creating oceanic crust for about 40 million years. Another pull-apart basins are the Falcon and Bonaire basins in the southern Caribbean. Here we can also find segments of an intraoceanic arc rotated and separated by normal faults adjacent to a thrust belt. That's what formed the Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao Islands and the South Caribbean deformed belt, all expressions of both transtension and transpression. To the east and west, oceanic plates subduct under the Caribbean plate. We know this because the earthquake's hypocenters occur at a wide range of depths, between 0 and 300 kilometers from the pink and purple dots, going through the green dots, until finally the deepest yellow dots. That's what seismologists call the Wadari-Benioff zone. Also, above these two subduction zones is where the Caribbean plate's recent volcanoes are found in both Central America and the Lesser Antilles. How and when did the Caribbean plate form? This has been a matter of debate in the last decades. There are two models that can explain how it formed: the in situ and the Pacific origin models. In the in situ model, the Caribbean plate was created between the North American and South American plates as the two separated after Pangaea broke up in Mesozoic times. In the Pacific origin model, the Caribbean plateau formed above a mantle plume in the Pacific and migrated eastward into the gap between North and South America left by the rifting in Triassic to Jurassic times. The Greater Antilles arc of Cuba, Hispaniola, and other small islands formed above a south-dipping subduction zone in Cretaceous and Paleogene times. Moreover, it collided with North America about 50 million years ago, accreting the northern part of the Caribbean plate to North America. This collision resulted in the northern strike slip margin we see today. Collisions also occurred in the south, where multiple accretion of oceanic terranes have occurred since the late Cretaceous to Paleocene, on the northwestern margin of South America. Today, we call the result of this 130 million years of tectonic evolution the Caribbean plate.
Hope you learned a lot from that. Let's go to the Lesser Antilles now. So, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, the Greater Antilles are over there. Here's Venezuela. And this is an island arc. When you see that, you think, there must be a convergent plate margin and a subduction zone. And you're right. So, the Lesser Antilles is a really interesting mix of different sovereign nations. So there's Antigua, Barbuda, Barbados, Dominica, Grenada, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Trinidad and Tobago. All of these are separate nations. There are 8 nations, and their total area is about the size of Delaware, one of the smallest American states. Although their population is much larger, it's about the size of New Mexico, total population of a couple million. Now, there are many of these islands are not independent nations, they are dependencies, and there are 17 dependencies that belong to 5 nations. And again, the total area of these are about the size of Delaware, and the total population is about the size of West Virginia, a little bit less. All right, let's talk about the Leeward Antilles. These are the islands north of the Venezuelan coast. So this is Venezuela down here. This is Colombia over here. These are the Lesser Antilles coming down here. And then these islands are the Leeward Antilles. Now, these belong to two nations, Aruba, Curacao, and Bonaire, which are sometimes called the ABC Islands. They belong to the Netherlands, or they're part of the Netherlands. But these nations over here belong to Venezuela. All right. Now, these islands reflect a very complicated tectonics of the Leeward Antilles. So here we've got South America, the Caribbean plate, and this is not really a subduction zone here, but it's kind of a region of compression. So the rocks get squeezed, some of them come up above the sea level, and you get islands. You don't have to know any of this complicated material, but it's enough to tell you that the geology in here is causing these interesting set of islands across the Leeward Antilles. All right, and then finally the Greater Antilles. And these are the islands of Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, which includes the nations of Haiti and Dominican Republic, and Puerto Rico, which is part of the United States. So, also the Cayman Islands, which are down here. So this total area is about the size of Kansas, but there's a lot of people that live in here. They're about the size population of California. Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic each have about 11 million people, and then Jamaica and Puerto Rico each have about 3 million people. So, one of the reasons that people often say the Caribbean is not really part of Latin America is because only some of them speak Spanish. There are actually 4 European languages that are spoken in the Antilles. There's Spanish, there's Dutch, there's French, and there's English, in addition to many other dialects. And Spanish is spoken in most of the larger islands of the Greater Antilles, and the Venezuelan Leeward Antilles. Dutch is spoken in quite a few places in the Leeward Antilles. French is spoken in Haiti and several of the Lesser Antilles Islands. And English is spoken in Jamaica, Cayman Islands, and many of these other places. So, the question for many people is the Caribbean part of Latin America? Well, if we go to the internet and ask Quora, they say not the whole Caribbean, only the 4 countries and territories belonging to Latin American countries, which they say includes Cuba, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, and Haiti. Wikipedia has a different way of dealing with this. They say the term Latin America and the Caribbean is, they separate the two, so they call it the LAC for Latin America and the Caribbean. And so that way they don't have to say it is or isn't part of Latin America. And basically, their LAC includes everything south of the USA. Let's watch first 12 minutes of a 14-minute video. Hope you enjoy it.
Antigua and Barbuda, one of the 4 twin island countries. It's kind of like the quieter, rich getaway island area, famous for their black pineapple, frigate bird sanctuary. They have 365 beaches, one for every day of the year. Most of the 93,000 people live on Antigua Island, and only about 2,000 live on Barbuda, the flat marshy island. They also legally own Redonda Island, which has nothing but birds and a small unnamed gecko species on it. The Bahamas, named after the Spanish word baja mar, meaning shallow sea. This was the first place Christopher Columbus discovered on his voyage to the New World. Long story short, because of its location, it's kind of like the Hawaii of the East Coast. This is pretty much where Americans anywhere east of the Mississippi like to go on vacation when they want a tropical island experience. There's so many cruise ships that go here, too many tourist sites like underwater caves, pink sand beaches, fortresses, native Taino sites. There's even an island with swimming pigs that come up to you and ask for food. Barbados! Geez, Rihanna, you still haven't gotten back to me. Barbados is basically the oddball of the Caribbean. For one, it's not even located on the trench line, and for some reason it sits about 100 miles east of their neighbors. which means they are outside of the hurricane zone and they rarely get affected. It was also the only island to have been briefly colonized by the Portuguese, but then they just kind of abandoned it. Known as the Beijan people, they are one of the richest nations in the Caribbean, known for their month-long crop over festival. They love eating flying fish and cuckoo washed down with Mount Gay rum. Pretty good stuff, I've tried it. Kraken will always be my number one though, but Barbados, you're doing it right. Cuba, the largest and most populous of the Caribbean nations, but not the most populous island. That belongs to Hispaniola, the name of the island shared with Haiti and Dominican Republic. Cuba is of course a Spanish-speaking Caribbean nation considered part of Latin America. We all know about the revolution, the Che Guevara stuff, and how the Marxist-Leninist Communist Party has ruled since the 60s, which led to the tension during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Clearly, it was resolved by the X-Men. No, but seriously, Cuba sticks out much in that they were pretty much isolated for a long time and kind of kept things to themselves. There was a lot of tension against the US, although awkwardly, the US still kind of kept Guantanamo Bay. Aside from all that though, they have lots of resources and culture. I mean, you can still find the Santeria rituals being performed. Boxing and baseball are huge out here. They love doing the mambo, cha-cha, and bolero, and rumba. Dominica, the quiet bookworm girl, youngest sister of the Caribbean. Dominica is probably the most well-kept island in the Caribbean nature-wise, and the government deliberately discourages mass tourism to maintain the beauty. Lots of rare animal species found here, including the national animal, the Cicero parrot, found on the flag, known for their purple feathers. This is a volcanic island, and it is still growing through the geothermal activity. They have the second largest hot spring in the world, Boiling Lake, and they have the Champagne Beach with bubbles coming out of the ground. Dominica also has one of the highest centenarian populations per capita on the planet. Many say it's because of the healthy diet and the happy, carefree atmosphere. Dominican Republic. Dominicans have quite a reputation. First off, they share the island with Haiti, and together the island as a whole has over 20 million people, about twice that of Cuba. The Dominican Republic is of course a Spanish-speaking Latin American country, yet for a long time there was a lot of tension between them and the French and Haiti. Haiti even took over for a time and lots of crazy things happened. For what it's worth though, Dominicans are definitely known for being some of the best baseball players in the world. They, along with Chile, are the fastest talkers in the Spanish-speaking world, and many people have trouble understanding them. And there's always like this weird rivalry they have with Puerto Rico in like everything: food, dance, sports, who has the best celebrities. Although let's be real, come on, J-Lo, sorry, Dominican Republic. For what it's worth though, the majority of the people in the DR are either black or mixed with black, making it the blackest of all the Latin American countries. What else? They love merengue, bachata, mofongos, and tostones, but don't tell that to the Puerto Ricans. Grenada, the Spice Island. Grenada is known for two things: being the world's second largest producer of nutmeg after Indonesia, producing about 20% of the world's supply. Not bad for one small little island. They even put it on their flag. And the other one is the Operation Agent Fury invasion in the 80s, which was criticized internationally, but it kind of worked out and the people of Grenada were like kind of okay with it in the end. And look it up. Grenada is also famous for their interesting Jab Jab festival, in which people douse themselves in oil and wear horns and dance to a drum-fueled frenzy to express freedom somehow. Haiti, the first black republic in the world, gaining independence from France in 1804. They had a revolution and you know the rest. This place is stereotypically known as the Voodoo Island, since voodoo is still sometimes practiced here in certain areas. Haiti is also the largest francophone nation and population in the Americas, more than Quebec. It's interesting though, because they made their own Creole the official language and use it in schools, written in street signs, books. It's a separate thing from French. Some say Haiti is one of the most unlucky countries in the Western Hemisphere. Nonetheless, they are also one of the most colorful and distinct in the Caribbean nations, with a plethora of Creole dance, music, festivals, and food. Oh man, you gotta try Haitian food, it's so good. Jamaica, the music island. We all know this guy, not too much I can tell you that you probably don't already know. The birthplace of reggae, ska, rocksteady, genres that would change the face of music forever. They produce the most music per capita out of any nation in the world. So many famous Jamaicans too, not just in the music industry, I'm sure you've heard of many of them. In any case, Jamaica has its pride, yet its problems, yet overall is probably one of the chillest nations in the Caribbean. Oh, and they have the fastest runners in the world. Now we reach the Three Saints, St. Kitts and Nevis, known as the mother colony of the West Indies. This was the first European colonized area in the Caribbean. St. Kitts and Nevis is the smallest sovereign nation in the Western Hemisphere, both in size and population, with only about 55,000 people. Out of all the saints, St. Kitts and Nevis is the most English-influenced one, as opposed to the others, which were French. The island was formed by a volcano, and it has one of the shortest isthmuses in the world at the tip of St. Kitts. Let's see, they're also famous for the drunk monkeys. Hundreds of years ago, they were brought over from Africa, and now they are known for taking the leftover drinks that tourists leave on the beach and they get totally drunk. It's hilarious, look it up. St. Lucia, known as the Helen of the West Indies, because like Helen of Troy in the Odyssey, the island was fought over between the British and French 14 times. It's like a weird English-French mixed island. Like, even though the British got indefinite control in the 19th century, they still retain some of the French influence. Everyone speaks both English and Lucian French Creole. Otherwise, it's another volcanic island. Sulphur Springs is the world's only dive-in volcano. Let's see, they love green figs and saltfish. For a small nation, they boast 2 Nobel laureates. St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Like St. Lucia, these islands were also fought relentlessly between the French and English. Finally, Treaty of Versailles, British, you know the deal. The nation is basically one big island where the majority of people live, St. Vincent, which has an active volcano, and 32 smaller islets and keys, many of which are private islands owned by either companies or people. Like Mustique Island, it has some weird names of places on it like Gingerbread, Buttercup, Opium, and Macaroni Beach. It's one of the few Caribbean countries with petroglyphs recording ancestry that can be found in these towns. And finally, Trinidad and Tobago, the last of the twin island countries. This island nation has switched between the hands of different European colonizers more than any other island nation in the Caribbean. Started out Spanish, then it became French, British, Dutch, and then yes, even Courlander, which is like a fancy ancient term for Lithuanian. Yeah, Lithuania, once under the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, took over Tobago for a short period of time. Compared to the other states, Trinidad has a very industrialized economy rooted in manufacturing and petroleum. Yes, they have oil and gas reserves. They even have a few skyscrapers built in their downtown area district. Very diverse population-wise, about 2/3 are black or mixed with black, and the majority of the rest are Indian, like from India, which makes about 1/5 of the population Hindu, which plays a strong role in the national festivals and holidays. Otherwise, yeah, what else? Nicki Minaj. And now we reach the overseas territories and dependencies and constituencies and so on. Now for the UK, they have 5 islands, all of which are pretty much tax havens. First, we have Anguilla. Yeah, that's how you pronounce it. Named after the Spanish word for eel because the islands are kind of shaped like an eel. Only about 14,000 people, and there's goats everywhere for some reason, and Chuck Norris lived there once. Virgin Islands. This used to be a huge pirate hangout, and today you might be able to find some buried treasure. Oh, and Richard Branson named his company after this place because he loved it so much. He spends about half the year on Nectar Island. Cayman Islands. Supposedly this was the birthplace of scuba diving. Really cool turtles, which is where it got its name from. And yeah, probably the biggest tax haven island of them all. Montserrat. This island had a huge volcanic eruption in 1995 that effectively shut down like half of the entire island and burned down the old capital. You can still see the old ruins today, and it's kind of interesting. Turks and Caicos. This is like Bahama's little brother that ended up staying with the UK, and at one point it almost joined Canada and could have been like Canada's Hawaii. No one knows exactly how they got their name. Something about cactus looking like a Turkish hat. I don't know. Yeah. They have one of the largest barrier reefs in the world, and they also play this thing called ripsaw music with a handsaw scraped with a knife. On a little extra credit, Bermuda is not technically the Caribbean, it's in the Atlantic, but it is a UK overseas territory, although sometimes the people of Bermuda classify themselves as Caribbean. And now the French islands, Guadeloupe and Martinique. These are regions of France, and they hold the exact same status and legislative power as the regions of European France. They are part of the Eurozone and speak French and Creole. They are like the Hawaiis of France. Both have active volcanoes. One on Martinique killed lots of people in 1902. Beautiful landscape. Guadeloupe has disputably the highest waterfall in the Caribbean. Saint Barthélemy. This used to be part of Guadeloupe, but it broke off in 2003, and now it's just a French collectivity. This is an interesting one because it was the only island colonized by the Swedish for a significant amount of time, and you can even see the symbolism in their coat of arms with the 3 crowns. And finally, Saint Martin. This is also a collectivity like Saint Barthélemy, and it's like the weird northern conjoined twin of the Dutch Saint Martin that shares the same name on the same island. It's basically a resort town and tropical getaway spot with a cool lagoon. Which brings us to the Dutch islands. First off, the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire, and Curacao. 2 of them are considered constituent countries within the Kingdom of the Netherlands, Aruba and Curacao. However, Bonaire voted to have closer ties and is considered a special municipality. All 3 speak Dutch, although English is widely known and taught. They were once known as the Land of Giants, as the natives were kind of supposedly really tall. They have interesting traditional indigenous sites and petroglyphs and cacti. Otherwise, yeah, you see a very distinct Dutch style in their architecture and very colorful buildings on all 3 of them. Then we get to the SSS Islands, Saba, St. Eustatius, and St. Martin. Saba is a special municipality. It is basically just a jutting volcano, potentially still active, and it is the least populated out of all the Caribbean units with only about 2,000 people. It also has the shortest airport runway in the world. St. Eustatius is also a special municipality. It's also very small, and at one point they had a huge Jewish population. You can still see the walls of the former synagogue and Jewish cemetery. And finally, St. Martin. It's considered a constituent country like Aruba and Curacao. They also have that weird Princess Juliana airport with planes that get really close to the beach and people go under it. And now the South American islands. Venezuela operates the Federal Dependencies of Venezuela, a chain of about 600 offshore islands and islets only populated by about 2,200 people, most of whom are on the largest island, La Tortuga. These islands are also important not only in giving Venezuela an extended economic zone, but also maintaining their offshore oil deposits. And for Colombia, they administer the San Andres, Providencia, and La Catalina archipelago islands, confusingly closer to Nicaragua, but nope, they took over them. San Andres is the more popular one. It has a cool resort and the culture centers of the native inhabitants. Interestingly enough, though, they have a flag that basically is the same as Scotland's, just a lighter blue hue. Finally, the islands administered by the USA. You have 3 of them: Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, and Navassa Island. The Virgin Islands are classified as an unincorporated organized territory of the USA. They were for the longest time actually colonized by Denmark until they were sold to the US back in 1916. Today they are known for the pristine tourist sites and beaches that people like to have weddings on. Puerto Rico is classified as an unincorporated territory to the United States and is the largest of all the territories both in area and population-wise at over 3 million. Puerto Rico is very complicated because in almost every right they are pretty much like their own country with incredibly high self-administration and autonomy. They mostly speak Spanish as their first language, English as a second one. They are U.S. citizens and can move about the U.S. with no problem, which is probably why there are actually more Puerto Rican people living in the U.S. than there are in Puerto Rico. This is a very unique topic. Maybe I should just make a whole separate filler week video on it. I don't know. And finally, the disputed but mostly U.S.-held island of Navassa Island. This has nobody on it, no harbors, no airstrips, only a lighthouse. And since it has become a wildlife refuge, it has been closed off to visitors unless you get a permit from the Fish and Wildlife Office in Boca Raton, Puerto Rico. And that's just about it. Pretty much everything in the Caribbean. You have 13 countries, 21 overseas entities of other countries, and a few hurricanes and earthquakes, but nothing can stop that warm tropical joy. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next one.
Hope you enjoyed that. All right, so let's talk about the geology of the Antilles. So this varies considerably between the Greater Antilles in particular and the Lesser Antilles, but also the Cayman Islands, which are pretty small, but we can talk about them. So the Greater Antilles is what we call a fossil arc. This is a convergent margin that's no longer operating as a convergent margin. So in the case of the Greater Antilles, there was a collision with North America which shut down the subduction zone and uplifted the islands to see what we have today. So that subduction zone is operating up to about 40 million years ago. The Lesser Antilles is basically an 850 kilometer long active volcanic arc. It is above a subduction zone that's still operating. And there's 5 active volcanoes, Montserrat, Guadalupe, Martinique, St. Vincent, and a submarine volcano. And we talked about Martinique and Mount Pelée before when we talked about volcanic hazards. Now, the Cayman Islands are a reef complex, so they're just poking up barely above sea level. All right, so here we're looking at the geology of the Lesser Antilles, and you can see when we talk about an island arc, this is an exquisite example of one because you can see this arc of the islands. It's really a classic kind of island arc. And what you can see here is the line of the arc volcanoes has changed so that now the volcanoes are over here in black and related. Those are the places where the activity is now. And then farther east is where you had older volcanoes, so that in the far east you've got volcanoes that are covered in limestone. They're so old and dead. But it's a spectacular example of an island arc and showing the evolution of this convergent margin system. All right, let's watch an 8-minute video about the tectonics and earthquake history of the Lesser Antilles.
The islands of the Lesser Antilles are home to 3.2 million people. Let's investigate the tectonics and earthquakes of the subduction zone along that margin of the Caribbean plate. The Caribbean plate moves east at about 2 centimeters per year with respect to the North and South American plates. There is essentially no relative motion and no earthquake zone marking the boundary between the North and South American plates in this region. So we will informally refer to the plate subducting along the Lesser Antilles subduction zone as the Atlantic plate. As that oceanic lithosphere dives beneath the Caribbean plate, it produces earthquakes of increasing depth from east to west across the subduction zone. Ocean bottom seismometer observations have refined plate tectonic cross-sections, and these contours show the depth to the top of the subducting plate. Also of note is that volcanoes are located above the point where the top of the subducting plate reaches 100 to 150 kilometers depth. In the northern part of the subduction zone, the Atlantic plate subducts to about 150 kilometers depth beneath the volcanic arc that lies 300 kilometers from the trench. The accretionary prism of sediment scraped off the subducting plate onto the overriding plate is about 5 kilometers thick. Near the southern part of the Lesser Antilles Trench, where the Orinoco River sheds sediment from the South American continent, the Atlantic plate carries the sediment load, many kilometers thick, towards the trench. Oceanic lithosphere subducts at a shallow angle in this region, where distance from the trench to the volcanic arc is 460 kilometers. The accretionary prism is nearly 20 kilometers thick due to the sediment load delivered to the trench and piled onto the Caribbean plate. Now, let's dig into the earthquake history. In January 1843, over 120,000 people lived on the island of Guadeloupe. On February 8th, the largest earthquake on record shook the region. All masonry structures in Porto Pietra were destroyed, resulting in 4,000 to 6,000 fatalities. This event illustrates the difficulty of interpreting patterns of earthquake intensity from written accounts of ground shaking and damage, then inferring earthquake properties without seismometer recordings. For example, some researchers developed intensity maps with isoseismal zones elongated parallel to the trench, and inferred the Guadeloupe earthquake was a magnitude 8 or larger plate boundary megathrust earthquake. Lack of tsunami indicated that the rupture did not reach the ocean floor. But other researchers developed intensity maps with a smaller area of violent intensity shaking with more circular isoseismal zones. Without knowing how deep the earthquake was, this intensity pattern could indicate several possibilities. Was it a shallow magnitude 7.5 within the overriding plate? Was it a magnitude 8 plate boundary megathrust? Or was it a larger event within the subducting plate? So it's not clear whether that earthquake was a plate boundary megathrust event. Since 1950, 4 major earthquakes have occurred within the subducting plate. These events were mostly due to extension within the upper part of the subducting plate as it bends into the subduction zone. Depth to the hypocenter below inhabited islands resulted in low human impact. In 1974, a magnitude 7.2 earthquake occurred northwest of Antigua, producing the strongest shaking in the Lesser Antilles since 1843. Because the epicenter was nearly 20 kilometers from Antigua and about 25 kilometers deep, there were no fatalities, though some damage occurred to buildings and port facilities. As the Lesser Antilles Trench curves from north-northwest to east-west where it meets the Puerto Rico Trench, the Atlantic plate subducts at an increasingly oblique angle. Resulting trench parallel forces produced the Bunce Fault, an 850-kilometer-long strike-slip fault that transports a sliver of accretionary prism along the trench. This structure was named for Betty Bunce, a pioneering marine geophysicist who was the first American woman to serve as chief scientist on a major oceanographic expedition. Marine geophysics and seismicity indicate the northern forarc of the Lesser Antilles is broken by normal faults. The Antigua earthquake occurred on one of these normal faults that pose earthquake and tsunami hazards to the region. With only 5 major earthquakes in the past 70 years, and perhaps no great megathrust earthquakes in the past 200 years, the unusually low seismicity here has puzzled seismologists for decades. GPS observations can now monitor subduction zone deformation. Most examples, like Japan or Alaska, have a high-friction megathrust fault that is stuck for decades or centuries, compressing and pushing the overriding plate backwards. When forces eventually exceed friction, an earthquake releases the stored elastic energy in a major magnitude 7 or great magnitude 8 or magnitude 9 earthquake. GPS observations reveal different dynamics for the Lesser Antilles subduction zone. GPS stations on the islands show little motion, indicating that the Caribbean plate is not being compressed or pushed back as the Atlantic plate subducts. Instead, the low-friction megathrust boundary slips more smoothly, with fewer earthquakes and perhaps without great magnitude 8 or 9 earthquakes. Although the dynamics of the plate boundary are complex and a topic of ongoing research, 2 factors are likely to contribute to low friction on the Lesser Antilles megathrust. The Atlantic plate is old, cold, and dense where it enters the subduction zone. It's pulled down by gravity, essentially free-falling into the deeper mantle, so frictional coupling along the boundary is very low. Additionally, oceanic crust formed at a slow spreading ridge, like the Atlantic plate, contains hydrated minerals that release fluids as the subducting plate warms. These fluids can further decrease friction along this plate boundary. So, great megathrust earthquakes and the resulting tsunamis may be extremely rare or entirely absent in the Lesser Antilles. This does not mean there is no tsunami hazard. The Great Lisbon earthquake of 1755 killed over 50,000 people from building collapse, fires, and a tsunami. And that tsunami crossed the Atlantic in 7 hours and, without warning, swept southward across the island arc with run-ups from 7 meters at Ceiba to 1.5 meters at Barbados. The largest historic tsunami of regional tectonic origin was produced by the 1867 magnitude 7.2 earthquake in the Anegada Passage. Even at Grenada, tsunami run-up reached 3 meters. In terms of natural hazards, volcanic eruptions and hurricanes in the Lesser Antilles have been far more deadly historically than have earthquakes or tsunamis. In 1900, the town of Saint-Pierre on Martinique was a bustling seaport. The catastrophic eruption of Mont Pelee in 1902 killed 30,000 people in a matter of minutes when a pyroclastic flow barreled down the mountain, burying the town. Volcanic activity also presents tsunami hazards from explosions, landslides, and collapse of volcano flanks, displacing ocean water. The Great Hurricane of 1780 pounded across the Lesser Antilles with wind speeds as high as 320 kilometers per hour, killing over 22,000 people, making it the deadliest hurricane in recorded history in the Atlantic. Whereas modern weather observations and modeling provide warnings that save lives and mitigate storm damage, hurricanes remain a deadly and costly natural hazard in the Lesser Antilles. Though less frequent than hurricanes, major earthquakes can occur anywhere in the Lesser Antilles with no warning. Protective actions like drop, cover, and hold on should still be understood by all who live in or visit this region.
Hope you enjoyed that. Now let's go through the geology of the Greater Antilles. And we're going to touch on all of these islands, but let's visit Cuba first. Let's watch a 4.5-minute video about Cuba.
Islands are generally a good place to study biodiversity and evolution. In a way, they're like natural experiments. They have sharp boundaries, and they're separated sometimes for long periods of time, and so evolution becomes more dramatic. This museum is about understanding life on Earth, why it is so diverse, how we can protect it and sustain it for the future. And so if you want to understand how life evolved in the Caribbean, Cuba is central to that puzzle. So all eyes are on Cuba right now as it's changing at an accelerated pace. I think it's the perfect time to engage more deeply with Cuba, to learn and understand better its nature and culture.
Cuba is a new museum exhibition which will be opening this fall. People are rediscovering Cuba and connecting with it. They're also very curious about it. It's a chance with this exhibition where we can bring people up to speed on the developments in Cuba and about its environmental richness.
Cuba is not just one island, but actually an archipelago of over 4,000 islands and keys. It includes virtually every habitat and ecosystem found in the whole Caribbean. Mountains, freshwater ecosystems like wetlands, underground caves, and coral reefs, such as the one being recreated behind me.
Islands are really fun because it's almost like evolution goes crazy there. For the lucky animals that get to islands, they often find what we describe as empty niches. They often have opportunities to evolve and fill these empty holes within the communities. And in some cases that means that you have to shift your size pretty dramatically. Cuba has things like this giant extinct owl. It was a top predator, one of the top predators in Cuba. So gigantism is a feature of islands, but also oddly enough you get exactly the opposite, which is a miniaturization. Cuba, for example, has the smallest bird in the world, the bee hummingbird, and the second smallest frog in the world.
Cuba has a lot of animals and plants that are found nowhere else. Over half of the plants, 95% of amphibians.
And with the reptiles, about 80% you won't find anywhere else. So we're going to be featuring live animals in the exhibition, and one of them will be the night anoles, which is the largest anole species in Cuba. The color change is really amazing on these.
Cuba's nature has been protected by a combination of historical circumstance, but also because Cubans themselves have been very committed to protecting their biodiversity.
Gardens of the Queen are this magical reef system which is now protected. Reefs are very different to the terrestrial environment. We don't see in Cuba anything like the endemism that we see on the land. Most of the species in the marine environment are shared with other island nations in the Caribbean. The fact that Cuba is so large and its reef systems have been kept in such good condition offers a tremendous conservation opportunity for the region.
The museum launched an expedition to Cuba in October 2015. This was a remarkable expedition. It brought together scientists and experts from the American Museum of Natural History, the National Museum of Natural History in Cuba, and Humboldt National Park. People sometimes are surprised to find out that the museum has been working in Cuba for over a century and pretty steadily. And that's because science transcends politics. Science is really about continuing to improve our understanding of the world, and our hope is that visitors will leave this exhibition with a more nuanced, deeper understanding of Cuba and a critical curiosity that will spark them to go beyond the headlines and learn more about it.
Hope you enjoyed that. Now let's go to Haiti. Let's watch a 3.5-minute video about Haiti.
Nobody here worries about the trash. Many people in Haiti are extremely poor. Environmental protection is a luxury for them. And yet one person has taken on the fight against the garbage. After studying in the U.S., Jean Wiener founded a marine protection organization and returned to his homeland.
When I used to go to the beach when I was younger, it was pretty clean in most places, but nothing like this. I mean, this is just an environmental disaster, and it doesn't just stay here. It also travels through all the oceans. It ends up in other countries, and I think we'll have a real problem.
In Cap Haitien and neighboring villages, the people live from fishing. The men usually find just trash in their nets. Wiener wants to establish a protection zone so fish stocks can recover.
There's heavy overfishing. There is an enormous amount of overfishing going on, and that's one of the issues which we're also trying to tackle, in that they're using inappropriate methods, both in terms of gear and seasons. So we really need to get together.
The men know exactly how serious the situation is, but they need to keep fishing.
The situation is tough. The family wants to eat, but it's become difficult to survive. Everything is more expensive, and we can hardly afford anything. We're hungry.
Because of the economic misery, the situation for nature keeps getting worse. Mangroves are being chopped down, burned, and processed for charcoal, which is used for cooking, because few people have electricity or gas. Wiener's organization wants to provide alternatives, like producing new foods. Fruit trees are being planted and sold or given to families. It's a simple solution.
It doesn't cost much. It's not highly technical, and yet a lot of people just don't seem to be doing it. So I don't know if it's something which happened culturally down the line, but it's something which we really need to have people really get much more involved in.
And fishermen could be retrained as beekeepers. So far, the teacher has found just one person interested, but the honey is selling well.
Here in the village, there aren't many people who want to learn to be beekeepers. They're afraid they'll get stung. So far, I have just one gentleman as a student, and he's just started.
The battle for Haiti's environment looks hopeless, but it has to be fought.
Without your environment, you have nothing. I mean, your social development, your economic development, and all of that is linked to having a sane, healthy environment. And the environment in Haiti, as far as I'm concerned, is still very much worth saving.
He's determined to save his great love, the ocean.
Now, hope you enjoyed that. Let's watch a video about the 2010 Haiti earthquake.
It's being called a catastrophe of major proportions. The Caribbean island nation of Haiti has been rocked by its biggest earthquake in more than 200 years. The 7.0 quake hit just south of the capital, Port-au-Prince, and was followed by 24 strong aftershocks. There's been widespread damage and panic as the tremors levelled buildings across the region. Hundreds of people are feared dead, and the Australian government is urgently trying to contact a small number of Australians who may be in Haiti. North America correspondent Lisa Miller begins our coverage.
The quake struck just before dusk. Its power shook the densely populated capital, Port-au-Prince, to its core.
The shaking was severe, and it went on for what I thought was quite a long time, but I guess it was about 15, 20 seconds. It delivered one heck of a jolt, and I'm very pleased to have made through that. It was very scary.
Shoddy construction in this impoverished nation meant buildings toppled to the ground. A hospital was flattened. Even the presidential palace couldn't withstand the force.
What we're hearing now is quite a mixture of sounds. Some of it is obviously the distress and concern and grief of people, mixed with cheering, where obviously people are being pulled out of the rubble and saved.
The UN says it can't account for many of its staff after its mission headquarters were destroyed. Phone lines were disrupted, making it hard to learn the severity of the situation. The daylight is expected to bring signs of even more damage and many casualties.
There was very strong ground shaking in the vicinity of the fault, and unfortunately that area is very densely populated, so a large number of people were exposed to very strong ground shaking.
These people were the lucky ones. They got on the last flight to Miami out of Haiti just after the earthquake hit.
Everything was just falling apart, all over the place. People was crying, and, the roof, like the ceiling was falling.
The US president is monitoring the situation, offering his prayers and most likely millions of dollars in aid.
The United States is offering our full assistance to Haiti and to others in the region. We will be providing both civilian and military disaster relief and humanitarian assistance, and our prayers are with the people who have suffered, their families, and their loved ones.
France, Canada, and governments across Latin America are also offering assistance. Haiti's 9 million residents are among the poorest in the Western Hemisphere. It may be some time before the extent of this disaster becomes clear. Lisa Miller, ABC News.
So you can see that in the eastern Greater Antilles, where Haiti and the Dominican Republic are, there's some really complicated geology. So here we've got a transform fault. We talked about that before. And we also have the world's shortest spreading center. So new oceanic crust is being produced like that. And this region is moving off to the east. Very complicated geology, and you can see the faults that were responsible for the very damaging earthquakes of Haiti. So this was about a year ago, there was another earthquake. The really bad earthquake was closer to Port-au-Prince, but that fault that we just saw comes through here and was responsible for not only the 2010 earthquake that killed so many people, but also this one that happened last year. This is how geophysicists study the nature of the faulting from seismic waves, and what a geophysicist could tell you is that this is telling you that this side of the fault is going that way and this fault is going this way. A classic example of a strike-slip fault. Now let's go to the Dominican Republic, the eastern side of Hispaniola. Let's watch an 11-minute video about it.
To many people, the Dominican Republic is mainly this. When in truth, it is so much more. If you venture out of the mainstream holiday resorts with their overpriced hotels, you will find a plentitude of beaches that don't just look fucking incredible, but also none of them will be crowded. And some of them you'll even have totally to yourself. I found the best beaches at the North Coast and on Samaná Peninsula.
If you are one of those people who like looking at Caribbean beaches, and my guess is you do, then check out my video about the 10 best beaches of the Dominican Republic. You might actually pretty much like it.
To get to this understandably popular waterfall, most tours start from Las Paradas, where you can hire one of the local farmers to take you there. You could of course also walk up there.
It's a 1-hour walk or 15 minutes on horseback.
On your way, you will be surrounded by lush green hills inside a wild jungle landscape that is scattered with creeks, natural pools, and countless opportunities to spot some tropical wildlife. Now keep in mind that the water of the pool beneath the waterfall is too deep and cold for a bath. But don't worry, the drop of these 40 meters high waterfall is so powerful that you will get wet anyway, just standing near it. The not-so-pretty working-class town and namesake of the peninsula Samaná is visited by most tourists for one reason: whale watching. I myself went there for a different reason though. The Samaná bridges to nowhere. This string of 3 bridges were built in the 1960s and 70s. The main reason behind this construction is not exactly known. Some say it was a money laundering attempt of drug cartels. Others say that the investments were undertaken in hopes of making the islands into a tourist hub around a large restaurant on the last of the islands. Well, that restaurant never opened, but the rundown bridges stand until today, leading to actually somewhere, namely to splendid views of Samaná town, the harbour and the surrounding hills.
By the way, if you enjoyed this video, give it a like or share it on your social media. Also, subscribe to my channel.
Santo Domingo is a unique mixture between a Latin American metropolis, a seaside holiday spot, a living museum, and a bunch of Caribbean restaurants, bars and nightclubs to make you go loco. This capital city isn't just the cultural, political and economic center of the Dominican Republic. Santo Domingo is also the oldest continuously inhabited European settlement on the entire American continent, founded by Christopher Columbus himself and his brother. The city's colonial zone is a UNESCO-declared World Heritage Site, so my advice is to spend at least 3 days here. In case you don't know where to start, check out this video where I show you the top 10 places in Santo Domingo. If you need to relax from the hot beaches or from the bustling metropolis of Santo Domingo, your best bet is to venture north, right into the cool highlands of the Cordillera Central mountain range. Here you will see heavily forested mountain peaks interspersed with curvy roads, spectacular valleys, rivers and waterfalls that are unparalleled in the whole Caribbean. You will pass through numerous small villages where you can witness how the country's two best-known resources are cultivated and processed: tobacco for cigars and sugarcane for rum. Shooting from a gaping hole inside a rock and plunging from 60 meters high, Himenoa Falls is so picturesque a sight that one of the opening scenes of Jurassic Park was filmed here. There are two waterfalls here, but Himenoa 1 is the lesser known, so there's a high chance you'll have the place for yourself, just as I did. Walking 20 minutes downhill from the small parking lot near the main road, you'll find some natural ice-cold pools to dip yourself into. If you do, however, keep clear of possibly dangerous whirling currents and a colony of wasps. When Christopher Columbus sailed here in 1493, he was so amazed by the sun's reflections in the water, which seemed to him like a sea of thousands of glittery silver coins, that he named this place Puerto Plata, literally meaning silver port. Not far from the seafront promenade, you'll discover the recently refurbished Parque Central. Take your time to wander through the surrounding streets, as they are full of beautifully colored and ornamented mansions, once owned by the city's rich tradesmen. The dunes of Bani are the only desert of the Dominican Republic. I hear it's quite busy over the weekend, but as I went there on a weekday, I had to share the place only with the local wildlife. Here you'll most likely meet lizards, an abundance of birds, and your occasional stray goat. These sand dunes stretch over an area of 20 square kilometers along the seashore, and some of them reach an impressive height of 35 meters. Now, interestingly, this unique landscape has been created by the two rivers Bahia and Nisao that both bring sediments piling up here where the rivers reach the sea. And what's really cool about this desert is that it is right next to the main road. Driving along the east coast on Road 5, you will notice an area that is full of coconut trees. At your right hand, watch out for a dude selling paintings and coconut water.
And that's where you stop.
Here you can witness an amazing and somewhat scary natural phenomenon that occurs when the relentless power of the ocean waves hit against the sharp rocks. The constant splashing of the waves against these rocks has created natural underground channels here, and when the waves rush in, you are definitely in for some action. You will most likely enter Antilles on a kayak or a boat. Once you leave the narrow channels cut through the mangroves, you'll understand where the name of this national park derives from. In the indigenous language of the Taino people, Haiti means high mountains. Antilles, that also served as a shooting location for Jurassic Park, has become one of the Caribbean regions with the highest biodiversity. Around 700 species of plants and 113 species of birds have been counted here so far. Watch the multiple pelican colonies that nest in the cays here and see the remnants of an ancient railroad system that was built to exploit the riches of this area. On the mainland, you will be led through a complex of caves that are full of mysterious rock carvings and ancient pictographs made by the Taino people centuries ago, before the times of the Spanish colonization.
I hope you enjoyed that video. Now let's visit Puerto Rico. And let's watch a 4-minute video about that.
This trip for me is really rediscovering Puerto Rico, rediscovering what makes it great, talking to some of the people who make it great.
Aquí tú levantas una piedra y sale un cantante, salen actores, mira, salió tuyo. Aquí el talento es silvestre.
So we need to create, we need to do this, we need to write about this. What are we going to write about? Let's write about Maria.
Yeah, and you engage with it. You
Yes,
engage
yes.
with what's going on. It's not about ignoring it's about working with it. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's artist neighborhood. We got a pedestrian life. What happened to you?
Tengo que pensarlo para hacerlo. Talk to me about salsa. Is it dead? Is it alive?
Salsa está más viva que nunca. Alive and kicking.
So we just walked through the streets of Old San Juan. We learned a little bit about the architecture. Explore the island, and explore the island beyond this hotel, this resort, but really sort of going all over Puerto Rico and seeing what makes it really special.
Puerto Rico is not only seeing the family and spending time with the family. Now Puerto Rico is also trying to do whatever we can in the whole reconstruction of the island after Hurricane Maria.
You know, I remember when I first came here to visit in the wake of Hurricane Maria, for the first time in my lifetime, there were no leaves on the trees. It was like winter had come to Puerto Rico, and here we are seeing green mountains again. Nature is back. If you're staying in a hotel and really walk the streets of Puerto Rico, and that's where the real magic of Puerto Rico is. You'll see the hospitality of the Puerto Rican people.
You'll see a strong country, people who work hard to make sure you have a good time.
And my whole heart and my whole mind was just like here. Like it's like the land is tied to your body and to your blood in a way you can't really describe. I just love it here. I love the island. I love the people. I love the beauty. There's so many beautiful natural resources. So many places that I don't even know that I see like through Instagram and the pictures. I'm like, that's here in Puerto Rico.
As soon as we knew we'd be successful enough to have a tour, I thought, I want to bring Hamilton to Puerto Rico, and I want to play Hamilton in Puerto Rico. I want to have an experience. We're hoping that through the money we raise, through the sale of the tickets and everything, that we're going to do our level best to restore arts funding for Puerto Rico. As you will see, there are so many talented artists and of every stripe in Puerto Rico, and we want to use Hamilton to support that.
Hope you enjoyed that. And finally, let's finish up in Jamaica. Let's watch a video about it. Okay, hope you enjoyed that. Now we're finished with sort of a whirlwind tour of the Caribbean islands, the Lesser and the Greater Antilles. But one of the things that this region is very famous for is hurricanes. And these are spectacular storms. We're well aware of them. We have hurricane seasons, and all kinds of problems are created by these. Let's talk a little bit about how hurricanes come through this region. So, let's watch a 2.5-minute video about how hurricanes form.
Hurricanes are very large and intense storms. But where do these giant storms come from? A hurricane starts with the warm water found near the equator. Hurricanes typically only form in tropical regions where the ocean is at least 80 degrees Fahrenheit. These warm waters evaporate, creating warm, moist air which acts as fuel for the storm. Wind is also needed for a hurricane to form. Many hurricanes in the United States are caused by winds blowing across the Atlantic Ocean from Africa. This wind causes even more of the warm water to evaporate into the air. The warm, moist air then rises high into the atmosphere, where it begins to cool. Way up there, the water vapor condenses back into liquid water droplets. Water droplets in the atmosphere form clouds, including big, stormy cumulonimbus clouds. As the warm air continues rising upward, the winds begin blowing in a circular pattern around a center. The spiraling winds gather up a cluster of big thunderstorm clouds. Once the spinning winds reach 74 miles per hour, the storm has officially become a hurricane. Hurricanes are huge. They can be 10 miles high and over 1,000 miles across. Once a hurricane hits land, it runs out of warm, moist air and its winds begin to weaken. But the storm can still cause lots of damage to communities near the coast. Thankfully, we have weather satellites that are constantly monitoring the conditions down here on Earth. The GOES-R series of weather satellites scan the hemisphere every 10 minutes and the US every 5 minutes, keeping an eye on conditions that might cause a hurricane to form. Once a hurricane forms, the satellites can help predict the storm's intensity and track it minute by minute. This information allows meteorologists to deliver early warnings and help people stay safe. Find out more about Earth's weather at NOAA's SciGinx.
Hope you enjoyed that. There's a very confusing terminology that uses different terms for the same phenomena in different parts of the world. So the part of in the New World, they're always called hurricanes, whether they're coming, like most of them, from the east through the Caribbean and up in the United States, or if they start in the eastern Pacific and go. Now, if they happen in the western Pacific, they're called typhoons, and they can be extremely damaging in regions of Southeast Asia. And if they happen in the southern hemisphere, they're called cyclones. And one of the things you can see that's interesting is that this part of the Atlantic doesn't have any. Hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones all nucleate where the ocean is very warm. And it's quite warm here, but there's just not enough of what we call a fetch that allows that warm water to organize into a hurricane like it can here, or it can here, or it can here. It's just too short between South America and Africa. All right, so what is the definition of a hurricane or a typhoon or a cyclone? So the definition is the storm has to reach wind speeds of at least 74 miles per hour, or if you prefer metric, 119 kilometers per hour. And if the wind speeds reach 111 miles per hour, then we upgrade it to an intense hurricane. And if a typhoon hits 150 miles per hour, it's called a super hurricane or a super typhoon, especially common in the western Pacific. Now, this is Hurricane Alley, and you can see that this Hurricane Alley, everything sort of spawns off of the west coast of Africa and then heads over in this direction. And whether it goes there or whether it goes there or where it goes, that's something else. But they all start here, they go west, and then they bend in some direction. This is a region of warm water in the Atlantic that stretches from the west coast of North Africa all the way to Mexico. And this region between 10 and 20 degrees north creates most hurricanes because of these warm sea surface temperatures. They don't form at other latitudes because, down at the equator, because the Coriolis force isn't big enough to cause them to gain the tight circulation they need. And they really require this hot water, which is only hot enough from July until mid-October, and that is the height of hurricane season. All right, now we know the Earth climate is warming up, and one of the concerns is that as the Earth warms, the oceans warm, and as the oceans warm, there's a good chance that we'll get more hurricanes or more intense hurricanes or some combination of the both. So we want to know, how will global warming affect hurricane activity? So here we see a chart going from 1860 to 2020, 160 years people have been keeping records. These are the number of hurricanes in the North Atlantic in those years. And what you can see, these are the total hurricanes in orange. total hurricanes unadjusted, and then the hurricanes reaching the United States down here. And what you can see is there's no obvious increase in the number of hurricanes that are happening over that time period. And that's kind of interesting because we know the earth and the oceans have been warming up through that time. You know, there are times when there's more hurricanes and less hurricanes, but there's no overall upward trend as you might expect. Next slide. All right, now another way people talk about hurricanes is not the number of hurricanes, but how much power they pack in total. So they have a quantity called the Power Dissipation Index, which accounts for cyclone strength, duration, and frequency. And what you're also seeing here in the dashed line is the sea surface temperature. And to first order, that sea surface temperature and the Power Dissipation Index seems to be tracking each other. You know, sea surface temperature is going from, 81 degrees Fahrenheit to 83 degrees Fahrenheit in this region where the hurricanes are forming. And, I think you might be able to see a trend here. Okay. So with the Power Dissipation Index, it appears that maybe the number of hurricanes may not be increasing, but maybe their intensity is becoming stronger. All right, so this is a plot showing the accumulated cyclone energy index, and this accounts for cyclone strength, duration, and frequency. So we're looking at the Western Pacific from 1950 to 2020. Okay, so this is below normal strength, near normal, and above normal. And you can decide for yourself whether or not global warming is having any effect on the accumulated cyclone energy index. Now, what's going to happen in the future? So, as many of you may know, there is a UN group called the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which has been asked to look into the issues about climate change. And so they've been asked to make projections about hurricane strength and intensity. Obviously, people in Florida and the Gulf Coast region, insurance adjusters, people that are trying to figure out whether or not what they need to prepare for in the future want to know. So what they've said is, well, it depends on how you look at it. So here we got two charts. This one is based on absolute sea surface temperature. This one is based on relative sea surface temperature between the equatorial Pacific, Atlantic, and the farther North Atlantic. So if you think about it, a hurricane is simply moving energy from the hot, high energy equatorial region into the cooler, lower energy regions to the north. And so the question is, what really controls hurricane strength and intensity? Is it the absolute sea surface temperature, or is it the difference between the equatorial and the northern latitudes? And that's what this is looking at. So if you think that hurricane intensity and strength is controlled by absolute sea surface temperature, then the models suggest that we're going to be seeing a huge increase in hurricane intensity in the future. On the other hand, if you think that the hurricane intensity and number is controlled by the relative temperature difference between the equatorial Atlantic and the regions to the north, then the models suggest there really isn't going to be much of a change. So take your choice, maybe make a note of this and come back in 20 years and take a look and see what it says, whether or not which of these two have happened. You can make up your own mind, and I hope you sort of think about this going forward. Thank you. Hope you enjoyed the course.